On a cold February morning in 1934, inside a grand French chateau rising above the Missouri countryside, frost clung to the windows like silver lace. The sun had not yet broken through the heavy gray clouds that hung over St. Louis County. Inside one of the 26 rooms of the great mansion, a man sat alone. August Anheuser-Busch Sr., 68 years old, heir to America's greatest brewing empire, president of Anheuser-Busch, builder of this magnificent estate known as Grant's Farm, patriarch of a dynasty that had conquered an industry and defined a city. For months his body had betrayed him in the cruelest ways. Heart disease squeezed his chest with invisible hands. Gout inflamed his joints until every movement brought agony. Dropsy filled his tissues with fluid, swelling his legs and feet until he could barely stand. The doctors had done what they could. Morphine brought temporary relief, dulling the sharp edges of pain, but never erasing it completely. 7 hours earlier, his physician had administered another dose, hoping to grant him a few hours of peace. It had not been enough. Outside his window, the deer park stretched across hundreds of acres, rolling hills covered in bare winter trees. The animals he loved, the deer that moved like shadows through the woods, were somewhere out there in the cold. This mansion, this estate, this monument to everything he had accomplished, surrounded him on all sides. 26 rooms, 14 bathrooms, 3 stories of red brick and limestone rising above a full basement. French Renaissance elegance meeting German strength. 6 Tiffany-stained glass windows depicting a stag in a forest, forever frozen in beauty. A perforated ceiling that allowed sound from the third-floor ballroom to drift through the house like music from another world. Floors of oak and walnut and marble. Gun rooms filled with trophies. Reception rooms glowing with ornamental plasterwork. He had built this place with his own vision, his own money, his own will. It had cost $300,000, a fortune even by the standards of the rich. It had taken 3 years to complete, from 1910 to 1913. Every detail had been chosen carefully, every brick laid with precision. This was supposed to be his refuge, his sanctuary from the pressures of running the largest brewery in America. This was supposed to be where he found peace, but peace had eluded him. The silence pressed against him now like a physical weight, crushing and suffocating. In the stillness of that cold February morning, August Anheuser-Busch Sr. picked up a pen. His hand, once so steady and strong, trembled as he brought it to paper. The morphine had made his thoughts hazy, but his intention was clear. He wrote slowly, deliberately, 5 simple words that would echo through generations of his family. Goodbye, precious mommy and adorable children. What followed in those next moments would mark the beginning of something that many would later call a curse. A curse that seemed to hang over one of America's most powerful families like a dark cloud that never fully lifted. But it was not a curse born of witchcraft or supernatural forces. It was a curse written in wealth and pressure and tragedy and the unbearable weight of a name that meant everything to everyone who carried it. It was the curse of being a Busch. The story of the Busch estate is not just about bricks and marble. It is about ambition that knew no limits, about an immigrant who conquered America, and about the price his descendants would pay for that conquest. To understand the mansion, we must first understand the man who made it all possible. The youngest of 22 children, born in a small German village where his family dealt in wines and brewery supplies. His name was Adolphus Busch, and he would change the face of American industry forever. Adolphus was born on July 10, 1839, in Kastel, a small district near Mainz in what would one day become the unified nation of Germany. His father, Ulrich Busch, was a successful man who had built a prosperous wholesale business, dealing in wines and brewery supplies. The family was wealthy, respected, comfortable. But there was one overwhelming problem for young Adolphus. He was the 21st child out of 22. 21 older siblings stood between him and any meaningful inheritance. The mathematics of it were simple and brutal. His father's estate, no matter how substantial, would be divided among so many children that Adolphus's share would be modest at best. He could have accepted this fate. He could have taken a position in his father's business, lived a comfortable middle-class life, married a local girl, raised children in the same town where he was born. But Adolphus Busch was not a man content with comfort. Even as a young boy, he showed signs of ambition that burned hotter than his siblings. He watched how his father conducted business, how deals were made, how relationships were cultivated. He attended quality schools, including the Collegiate Institute of Belgium in Brussels, where he received an education that sharpened his already keen mind. By the time Adolphus reached 18 years old, he had made his decision. If Germany offered him no future, then he would seek his fortune elsewhere. At 18, in 1857, he made the choice that would alter not only his own life, but the entire course of American brewing history. He left his homeland. He said goodbye to his parents, to his many siblings, to everything familiar. Along with 3 of his older brothers, he boarded a ship bound for the New World. The Atlantic crossing took weeks. The conditions were cramped, often miserable, but Adolphus kept his eyes on the horizon, on the promise of America, on the land where a man with nothing could become everything. He arrived in St. Louis, Missouri, and the city must have seemed like a revelation. St. Louis in the mid-1800s was raw and bustling, a river town perched on the banks of the mighty Mississippi. The streets were often muddy, unpaved, chaotic with commerce and ambition, but it was also a city thick with German immigrants, tens of thousands of people who had made the same journey Adolphus had made, who spoke his language and understood his hunger. The German quarter teemed with bakeries and shops and beer halls where lager flowed freely and nostalgia for the old country mixed with excitement for the new. St. Louis had 2 crucial advantages that made it perfect for brewing. First, the Mississippi River provided an endless supply of fresh water, essential for making beer. Second, the city was built on top of a network of natural caves that stayed cool year-round, perfect for storing beer in an age before refrigeration. For a man like Adolphus, who came from a family in the brewery supply business, the opportunity was obvious and irresistible. St. Louis in the mid-1800s was a rough, muddy, bustling river town. The Mississippi flowed past its docks, carrying commerce and dreams in equal measure. German immigrants packed the neighborhoods, and they brought with them a deep thirst for beer. Adolphus, sharp-eyed and hungry for opportunity, saw the potential immediately. He partnered with a man named Ernst Wattenberg to establish a business selling brewing supplies. Hops from the finest farms, malt processed to perfection, equipment forged from iron and copper. They sold to the dozens of small breweries that had sprung up throughout the city. German immigrants trying to recreate the beer of their homeland in this strange new country. Adolphus was a natural salesman, charming and persuasive, able to speak the language of business in both German and increasingly polished English. Among his many customers was a man named Eberhard Anheuser, and this connection would prove to be the most important of Adolphus's life. Eberhard was not a brewer by training or by choice. He was a prosperous soap manufacturer who had reluctantly acquired a failing operation called the Bavarian Brewery in 1860, to settle debts owed to him by the brewery's bankrupt owner, George Schneider. The brewery was a mess when Eberhard took control. The beer was mediocre at best, thin and unremarkable. Competitors throughout the city made better products. The operation hemorrhaged money month after month. Eberhard kept it running more out of stubbornness than hope, pouring his soap manufacturing profits into the struggling enterprise. But Adolphus noticed something else about Eberhard Anheuser besides his failing brewery. He noticed that Eberhard had a daughter. Her name was Lily, the third daughter of the soap maker, and she possessed both beauty and intelligence. Some say Adolphus genuinely fell in love with her. Others whisper that he saw an opportunity and seized it with both hands. Perhaps it was both. Love and ambition are not always enemies. On March 7, 1861, Adolphus married Lily Anheuser in an elaborate double wedding ceremony. His brother Ulrich married Lily's sister Anna at the same ceremony, binding the Busch and Anheuser families together in ways that would prove unbreakable. 1 month later, the world exploded into war. The American Civil War erupted with the shelling of Fort Sumter. St. Louis, a border city in a border state, became a cauldron of divided loyalties and violent conflict. Adolphus joined the Union Army, serving honorably for 3 months before receiving a discharge, while other men suffered devastating financial losses during the chaos of those war years. Adolphus made shrewd investments that somehow increased his wealth. He had an instinct for opportunity that never failed him, a sense of when to buy and when to sell that seemed almost supernatural. After the war ended in 1865, Eberhard Anheuser looked at his struggling brewery and made a decision that would change American history. He saw potential in his son-in-law that he had not seen in anyone else. Adolphus was smart, driven, innovative, fearless. In 1865, Eberhard brought Adolphus into the business as a salesman. The young immigrant threw himself into the work with ferocious energy. He traveled constantly, visiting bars and restaurants and hotels, convincing owners to stock Anheuser beer instead of the competition. He was tireless, working 16-hour days, sleeping in cheap hotels or on train benches, always pushing forward. The partnership worked. Sales began to climb. The brewery, which had been dying slowly under Eberhard's uncertain management, began to stabilize and then to grow. In 1873, Adolphus became a full partner in the enterprise. By 1879, the company bore both their names, Anheuser-Busch Brewing Association. The hyphen between those two names represented more than a business partnership. It represented a union of German craftsmanship and American ambition, of old world tradition and new world innovation. What Adolphus understood, what set him apart from every other brewer in America, was that beer could be more than a local product consumed within a few miles of where it was brewed. He envisioned something revolutionary, a national brand, a beer that could travel from coast to coast without spoiling or losing quality. At the time, this seemed impossible. Beer was a delicate product, vulnerable to heat and bacteria. Most breweries could only serve customers within wagon distance of their facilities. Ship beer too far in the summer heat, and it would spoil before it reached its destination. But Adolphus had studied the work of Louis Pasteur, the French chemist who had discovered that heating beer to a specific temperature could kill the bacteria that caused spoilage without significantly affecting taste. In 1872, Adolphus pioneered the application of pasteurization in American brewing. It was a risk. Many brewers believed heating beer would ruin it, but Adolphus tested and refined the process until he got it right. Suddenly, Anheuser-Busch beer could survive journeys of weeks or even months. pasteurization was only the first step. Adolphus understood that even pasteurized beer needed to stay cool during transport, or it would still lose quality. He invested enormous sums of money building a network of ice houses along railroad lines stretching across the country. Then, he launched the first fleet of refrigerated freight cars, specifically designed for the brewing industry. These cars were engineering marvels, insulated chambers on wheels that could keep beer cold from St. Louis to San Francisco. The impact was immediate and dramatic. Anheuser-Busch beer began appearing in cities and towns where no one had ever tasted it before: California, Texas, New York, Florida. Everywhere the railroads went, Adolphus's refrigerated cars followed, delivering fresh beer to thirsty customers. Bars that had only served local brews suddenly had access to beer from St. Louis. The name Anheuser-Busch began to appear on signs and in advertisements across the nation. Then came the beer that would define everything. In the early 1880s, a man named Carl Conrad held the trademark for a name, Budweiser, which referred to a Bohemian-style lager. Conrad had Anheuser-Busch brew this beer for him under contract. But Conrad was a better marketer than businessman. In 1882, he went bankrupt. Adolphus, seeing opportunity where others saw failure, immediately purchased the rights to the Budweiser name and trademark. He adapted the recipe, making it lighter and crisper, more suited to American tastes. Budweiser became the flagship beer of Anheuser-Busch, the product that would eventually conquer not just America, but the world. Adolphus was a master of branding and marketing decades before those terms became commonplace. He adapted an old European slogan and applied it to Budweiser, calling it the king of beers. The phrase was brilliant in its simplicity and boldness. It suggested royalty, superiority, dominance. Once people heard it, they never forgot it. Adolphus plastered the slogan on every piece of advertising material, on every sign, on every bottle. The king of beers. It became one of the most recognized taglines in American history. By 1901, Anheuser-Busch had achieved what once seemed impossible. It surpassed its longtime rival Pabst to become the largest brewery in the United States of America. The company that had started as a failing operation now produced millions of barrels of beer annually, employed thousands of workers, and generated profits that seemed to grow exponentially year after year. And Adolphus Busch lived like the emperor he had become. His personal wealth was staggering by any measure. He owned a palatial mansion at No. 1 Bush Place in downtown St. Louis, a structure so grand that visitors often stopped on the street just to stare at it. The interior featured imported marble, crystal chandeliers that dripped light like frozen waterfalls, furniture shipped from Europe, and artwork collected from the finest galleries. But one mansion was not enough for a man of Adolphus's means and ambition. He owned a country estate at Grant's Farm in St. Louis County, 245 acres of rolling hills and forests, where he could hunt and ride and escape the pressures of the city. He maintained 2 lavish homes in Pasadena, California, where the warm weather and sunshine offered relief from Missouri's brutal winters. He owned a hops farm in Cooperstown, New York, ensuring he controlled every aspect of his beer's production. He maintained 2 magnificent villas in Germany, keeping ties to the homeland he had left behind decades earlier. And for traveling between all these properties, he owned a private railroad car named the Adolphus, outfitted with luxuries that rivaled the finest hotels. Adolphus traveled constantly, moving from property to property, from city to city, always working, always building, always expanding his empire. He donated millions of dollars to charitable causes, understanding that great wealth carried great responsibility. Harvard University received substantial funds from him to establish a Germanic museum. Washington University in St. Louis welcomed him to its board of directors, where his business acumen and generous donations helped shape the institution. Churches, hospitals, orphanages all received his support. He was a philanthropist whose name appeared on plaques and dedications across multiple states. But even emperors grow old, and even the strongest bodies eventually fail. In 1906, Adolphus caught what seemed like a simple cold during one of his business trips. The cold developed into pneumonia, and the pneumonia nearly killed him. His doctors managed to save his life, but his health never fully recovered. The vitality that had carried him from a German village to American dominance began to fade. He tired more easily. He suffered from various ailments that multiplied with each passing year. Still, he refused to slow down, refused to acknowledge the limitations of age. By 1913, his heart was failing. On October 10, 1913, while vacationing at his villa in Germany, Adolphus Busch died. He was 74 years old. His estate was worth $60 million, the largest ever probated in Missouri at that time. His funeral was extravagant beyond measure. 25 truckloads of flowers arrived. Florists for miles around sold out. Services were held in 36 cities where Anheuser-Busch had branches. St. Louis observed a 5-minute moment of silence. The Emperor of Germany sent a representative. Adolphus had conquered the New World, and the Old World mourned him. Leadership of the empire passed to his eldest surviving son, August Anheuser-Busch Sr., born December 29, 1865. August had been groomed for this moment his entire life. He had married Alice Ziesemann on May 8, 1890. Together they had 5 children. August was serious, disciplined, and deeply committed to his father's legacy. When Adolphus died, August stepped into the role of president and CEO. What he inherited was not just a company, but a responsibility that weighed like iron chains. August faced challenges his father never had to endure. The First World War brought anti-German sentiment that threatened to destroy everything the family had built. Then came an even greater catastrophe: Prohibition. In 1920, the 18th Amendment banned the manufacture and sale of alcohol across the United States. For a brewing company, it was a death sentence. But August was resourceful. He diversified. Anheuser-Busch began producing corn products, baker's yeast, ice cream, soft drinks, and commercial refrigeration units. The company survived by refusing to die. During those difficult years, August found solace in a place far from the pressures of downtown St. Louis. In 1903, his father had purchased a piece of land in St. Louis County, 245 acres of rolling hills and open sky. The property had a curious history. It had once been owned by Frederick Dent, whose daughter Julia married a young Army officer named Ulysses S. Grant. Grant himself had built a rough log cabin there in the 1850s, a humble structure he called Hardscrabble. When Adolphus bought the land, he kept the name the locals used, Grant's Farm, and he turned it into a private hunting preserve stocked with deer. August loved Grant's Farm. It was his escape, his sanctuary. In 1910, he made a decision that would create one of the most magnificent private residences in America. He would build a mansion there, a castle worthy of the Busch name. He hired architects Frederick Widman and Robert Walsh, both of whom had worked for the brewery's trusted architect Edmund Jungenfeld. For the grounds, he brought in Julius Pitzmann, a famous German-American surveyor, and George Kessler, a renowned landscape designer. The architects drew inspiration from the great European palaces of the 16th through 18th centuries, those magnificent structures built by kings and nobles who understood that architecture was power made visible. French Renaissance revival became the dominant style, but German pride ran through every detail. The exterior would be built from red brick rather than stone, a nod to German tradition and practicality. The roofline, the arched entrances, the forecourt with its circular drive, all echoed the elegance of French chateaux, standing proud in the countryside of the Loire Valley. But the restraint, the lack of elaborate sculpture and unnecessary ornamentation, the masculine strength and solid permanence of the design, these were unmistakably German characteristics. August wanted a house that announced power without shouting, wealth without vulgarity, permanence without pretension. Construction began in 1910, and it immediately became one of the most ambitious private building projects St. Louis had ever witnessed. The firm of Fruin and Colnan was brought in to supervise the massive undertaking. Hundreds of laborers arrived at the site each morning, their wagons loaded with materials hauled from downtown suppliers and distant quarries. The hilltop location presented challenges. Everything had to be carried up steep inclines. Heavy loads of bricks, massive limestone blocks, timber beams, plumbing fixtures, all of it moved by muscle and determination. The red bricks came from local kilns, each one inspected for quality and uniformity. This was not the time for shortcuts or second-rate materials. The bricks were laid one by one, thousands upon thousands of them, forming walls that would stand for centuries. Limestone details were carved by skilled stoneworkers, artisans who shaped the rock with hammers and chisels until it matched the architectural drawings exactly. These limestone pieces framed every window and door, providing contrast against the red brick and giving the mansion its distinctive elegance. The mansion rose 3 full stories above a deep basement, 26 rooms spreading across multiple levels, 14 bathrooms, an almost unheard-of luxury for the time when many Americans still used outhouses. The exterior design borrowed heavily from French Renaissance palaces of the 16th through 18th centuries. The roofline, with its complex angles and prominent chimneys, would not have looked out of place in the Loire Valley. Arched entrances suggested strength and permanence. A forecourt provided space for carriages to arrive and depart with ceremony. But August wanted more than just French elegance. He wanted German pride woven into every aspect of the design. So while the overall aesthetic was French, the details revealed his heritage. The red brick was a distinctly German choice, favored in the architecture of his homeland over the white stone preferred by the French. The roofline incorporated German red roof tiles imported at great expense. The restraint in the decoration, the lack of excessive ornamentation, the masculine strength of the structure. These were German sensibilities applied to a French template. Inside, craftsmen worked for months creating interiors that would take your breath away. Louis Comfort Tiffany, already famous for his stained glass masterpieces, was commissioned to create 6 windows depicting a stag standing in a forest. These windows were not merely decorative, they were works of art, each piece of colored glass carefully selected and assembled to create images that seemed to glow with inner light. When sunlight streamed through them, the rooms filled with colors that shifted throughout the day, reds and greens and golds dancing across walls and floors. The ceiling above the main landing on the 2nd floor received special attention. Architects designed it with thousands of tiny perforations, holes so small you might not notice them at first glance. But these perforations served a purpose both practical and poetic. On the third floor, directly above, was a magnificent ballroom where August planned to host parties and celebrations. When music played in that ballroom, the sound would travel through the perforated ceiling and drift down through the entire mansion like a blessing from above. Guests on the first or second floor would hear the faint strains of orchestra music, waltz melodies floating through the house as if the building itself were singing. By 1913, the work was complete. August and Alice moved into their French chateau on the Missouri countryside. The cost had reached $300,000, a staggering sum at the time. But for August, it was worth every penny. From the windows, he could see the deer park, the rolling hills, the endless sky. The mansion sat on 22 private acres, hidden behind walls of trees, far from the noise and chaos of the city. Here he could breathe. Here he could be at peace. For a time, life at Grant's farm was everything August had dreamed. His children played in the gardens. Alice hosted gatherings in the grand rooms, the ballroom on the third floor filled with music and laughter. On quiet mornings, August would walk the grounds, watching the deer move through the trees like ghosts. He had built something permanent, something that would last. Or so he thought. But the world outside the gates of Grant's farm was changing. Prohibition dragged on, strangling the brewing industry. The economy stumbled, then collapsed into the Great Depression. August pushed himself harder, working longer hours, sleeping less, worrying more. The pressure never stopped. By the early 1930s, his health began to fail. Heart disease crept through his veins. Gout swelled his joints. Dropsy filled his body with fluid. Pain became his constant companion. For months, he suffered in silence. Doctors gave him morphine, but it brought only temporary relief. His family watched him grow weaker, his face pale, his steps unsteady. On February 10th, 1934, the darkness inside him became too much to bear. Alone in his room at the mansion he had built, August Anheuser-Busch Sr. made a choice that would shatter his family. He penned a brief note. "Goodbye, precious mommy and adorable children." Then he let go of the world. The news spread like wildfire. The president of Anheuser-Busch, the man who had guided the company through war and prohibition, had chosen to leave the world on his own terms. Thousands of mourners gathered at the mansion. Senators and brewers paid their respects. August's lawyer spoke at the service, calling him as great a leader in saving the industry as his father had been in creating it. Though his parents were buried in a grand mausoleum at Bellefontaine Cemetery, August had requested burial at Sunset Burial Park, near Grant's farm. Even in death, he wanted to stay close to the place he loved most. His widow, Alice, was left to grieve in the mansion that had been built for happiness, but had witnessed such sorrow. The Busch family tradition dictated that leadership pass to the eldest son. Adolphus Busch III, born February 10, 1891, became the new president. Adolphus III was capable and hard-working. Under his leadership, the company's baker's yeast operations became the nation's leader. He guided Anheuser-Busch through the end of Prohibition in 1933 and into the recovery years that followed, but he was not destined for a long reign. On August 29, 1946, Adolphus III collapsed at Barnes Hospital in St. Louis. A cerebral hemorrhage had struck without warning. He was only 55 years old. Within hours, he was gone. The family mourned another sudden loss, another leader taken too soon. This time, the presidency fell to Adolphus's younger brother, the man the world would come to know as Gussy. August Anheuser-Busch Jr., born March 28, 1899, was everything his father and older brother were not. Where they had been serious and restrained, Gussy was bold, brash, and larger than life. He loved parties, women, and spectacle. He had joined the family business at 18, starting by sweeping floors and cleaning vats. By 1924, he was general superintendent of brewing operations. After his father's death in 1934, he became head of the brewing division. Now, in 1946, at age 47, he was president and CEO of the largest brewery in the world. Gussy understood something his predecessors had not. Beer was not just a product, it was a show. In 1933, to celebrate the repeal of Prohibition, Gussy had introduced the Budweiser Clydesdales, massive draft horses hitched to a red beer wagon. The sight was unforgettable. The Clydesdales became the symbol of Anheuser-Busch, appearing at parades, events, and advertisements across the country. Gussy knew how to sell beer by selling an image. In 1953, he made another brilliant move. The owner of the St. Louis Cardinals baseball team, Fred Sy, had been convicted of tax evasion and was forced to sell. When Gussy heard that out-of-town buyers wanted to move the team to Houston, he stepped in. Anheuser-Busch purchased the Cardinals for $3.75 million, keeping the team in St. Louis. The stadium was renamed Busch Stadium. The Cardinals became a marketing tool, a giant outdoor tavern where fans drank Budweiser and watched America's pastime. Under Gussy's ownership, the Cardinals won 6 National League pennants and 3 World Series championships. Gussy also made Grant's Farm his home. He was the last of the Busch family to live permanently in the grand mansion his father had built. He filled the estate with exotic animals, lions, camels, elephants, peacocks, kangaroos, turning the property into a private zoo. In 1955, he opened Grant's Farm to the public, allowing visitors to tour the deer park, see the Clydesdales, and experience a piece of the Busch family legacy. It became one of St. Louis's most beloved attractions. But Gussy's personal life was turbulent. He married 4 times. His first wife, Marie Church, died in 1930. Less than a year later, he married Elizabeth Overton Dozier, a woman he had been involved with before his first wife's death. The marriage was scandalous, happening just 2 weeks after Elizabeth's divorce. They had 2 children together before the relationship soured. Gussy then married Gertrude Buchholzer, known as Trudy, and they had 6 children. He even built a small Swiss-style chapel on the Grant's Farm property in the 1960s for Trudy. Eventually, that marriage also ended. In 1981, at age 82, Gussy married his longtime secretary, Margaret Rode. She died of a pulmonary embolism in 1988. Through it all, Grant's Farm remained the center of Gussy's world. He would step out onto his back porch every morning to feed the deer. He hosted wild parties in the mansion, food fights in the dining room, fire extinguisher battles in the hallways. He rode horses through the house to cheer up his sick father years earlier. He lived without apology, without restraint. The mansion, built by his father as a place of dignity and peace, became under Gussy a stage for excess. But behind the laughter, darkness gathered. On a cold day in December 1974, tragedy struck with horrifying swiftness. Gussy's youngest daughter, 8-year-old Christina Martina Busch, was being driven home from school. On Interstate 270, an 8-car collision occurred. Christina and the chauffeur were killed. Gussy, 75 years old, was devastated. He had lost a child, his baby, in an instant. Grief consumed him. He became increasingly difficult to work with, his temper unpredictable, his focus scattered. The following year, in May 1975, his own son made a move that would break what remained of Gussy's heart. August Busch III, Gussy's eldest son from his second marriage, orchestrated a boardroom coup. With the support of key executives, August III forced his father to step down as CEO and chairman of Anheuser-Busch. Gussy was allowed to remain president of the Cardinals and keep company perks, but only if he publicly presented the move as voluntary. The extent of his removal was kept secret for 10 years. Divisions in the family resulting from the coup would persist for decades. Gussy never forgot the betrayal. A year later, he even considered working with the R.J. Reynolds Tobacco Company on a hostile takeover to regain control. But in the end, he could not bring himself to take the company away from the family, even a family that had cast him aside. He retreated to Grant's Farm and to the Cardinals, the one kingdom where he still ruled. Then, in 1976, another tragedy struck, this time involving Gussy's son, Peter Busch. Peter had always been fascinated with guns. He had even accidentally shot himself in the leg once. On a day at Grant's Farm, Peter was with his best friend, David Leaker, the son of the president of the So Good Potato Chip Company. According to Peter, he tossed a loaded Colt .357 handgun onto his bed. The gun went off, striking David Leaker and killing him instantly. Police investigated. They determined that the muzzle of the gun had been within just a few feet of Leaker's face when it discharged. Peter was charged with manslaughter. The case cast another shadow over the Busch name. The mansion at Grant's Farm, once a symbol of triumph, now seemed haunted by sorrow. Every room held memories, some joyful, many painful. The ballroom where music had played now stood silent. The gun room, filled with trophies, felt like a shrine to violence. The Tiffany windows, depicting a stag in the forest, seemed to capture something fragile and hunted. Gussy Busch continued to live at Grant's Farm until his death on September 29, 1989. He was 90 years old. Pneumonia claimed him at his home in St. Louis County. When his death was announced during a Cubs game at Busch Stadium, the Cardinals players wore black armbands. Broadcaster Jack Buck led a minute of silence. The city mourned the loss of a legend. Gussy had been the last of the beer barons, the last of a breed that built empires with boldness and bravado. At the time of his death, Gussy owned 12.5% of Anheuser-Busch, more than 30 million shares worth over $1.3 billion. His will placed Grant's Farm into a trust for his heirs. He had hoped, according to some accounts, that one of his children would eventually buy out the others and keep the estate intact. But his children were scattered across the country, from Texas to Virginia, each with their own lives and their own ambitions. The mansion became the subject of a bitter family dispute. Meanwhile, the Busch name continued to attract tragedy. August Busch IV, great-great-grandson of Adolphus, became CEO of Anheuser-Busch in 2002. He was a risk-taker, a man who drove powerboats, motorcycles, jet planes, and helicopters. In 1983, when he was a 20-year-old student at the University of Arizona, he left a bar near Tucson with a 22-year-old woman. His black Corvette crashed. The woman was killed. Busch was found hours later at his home with a fractured skull, claiming amnesia. After a 7-month investigation, authorities declined to press charges, citing lack of evidence. 2 years later, Busch was acquitted by a jury in St. Louis on assault charges after a police chase ended with an officer shooting out a tire on his Mercedes-Benz. In 2008, August Busch IV presided over the sale of Anheuser-Busch to the Belgian company InBev for $52 billion. It was the end of an era. After 156 years, the Busch family no longer controlled the company Adolphus had built. August the 4th remained on the board, but had no role in day-to-day operations. He later admitted to battling depression and other issues after the sale. Then, on December 19, 2010, tragedy struck again. August Busch IV's girlfriend, 27-year-old Adrienne Nicole Martin, was found dead in his mansion in Huntley, a wealthy St. Louis suburb. She had been an aspiring model, a former Hooters waitress, a young mother with dreams of a better life. According to authorities, it took more than 40 minutes after her body was discovered before someone called 911. The medical examiner's report revealed that Adrienne had died from an accidental overdose of oxycodone, with cocaine also found in her system. Prosecutors investigated, but concluded there was no evidence of foul play. August Busch IV was never charged. Adrienne's ex-husband, Dr. Kevin Martin, filed a wrongful death lawsuit on behalf of their 8-year-old son, Blake. Adrienne's divorced parents later joined the lawsuit. In October 2012, Busch settled the case for $1.75 million. His attorney released a statement saying Busch cared deeply for Adrienne's son and wanted Blake to receive as much of the settlement as possible. But the headlines had been written. The Busch name, once synonymous with American success, was now linked to scandal, death, and unanswered questions. Back at Grant's farm, the mansion stood silent. The estate had been leased to Anheuser-Busch InBev, which continued to operate the public attraction. But the Busch family still owned the land and the house itself. In November 2015, the St. Louis Zoo announced plans to purchase Grant's farm for approximately $30 million. The zoo wanted to use the land for breeding endangered species and expanding its operations. But Billy Busch, one of Gussy's sons, opposed the sale. He wanted the property to stay in the family. He made a competing offer, planning to build a brewery on the land and rent space for events. A family feud erupted. 4 of Gussy's children supported selling to the zoo. Billy and a few others wanted to keep it. The dispute went to court. In March 2016, the zoo withdrew its offer, citing family disagreement as one of the primary reasons. In April, Billy outbid his siblings by $1, offering $26,001 plus $8 million for the mansion. But the battle was not over. Finally, in December 2017, 5 family members, Trudy Busch Valentine, Beatrice Busch von Gontard, Peter Busch, Andrew Busch, and Robert Herman Jr., reached an agreement. They would purchase Grant's farm for $51 million and keep it free and open to the public. It was the outcome Gussy had hoped for, a way to preserve the legacy while honoring the family name. The mansion, the deer park, the Clydesdales, the memories, all would remain. Today, Grant's farm still welcomes visitors. Families walk through the Bauernhof, the German-style barn where free beer samples flow. They ride trams through the deer park, past Ulysses S. Grant's hand-built log cabin, Hardscrabble, the only structure built by a president before taking office that still stands. They see the Budweiser Clydesdales in their stables, magnificent animals that weigh over 2,000 pounds each, their heads another 2 or 3 feet in the air. And through the trees, if they look carefully, they can glimpse the mansion, the big house, the French chateau on the hill. But the public cannot enter. The mansion remains private, owned by the Busch family, occupied occasionally by descendants, but mostly standing empty. Guides sometimes offer special estate tours for a fee, walking visitors around the exterior, showing them the playhouse built for Gussy's children, the Swiss chapel built for Trudy, the pool house where Elvis Presley once swam. But the doors to the mansion itself stay locked. The rooms where August Sr. chose darkness, where Adolphus III collapsed, where Gussy grieved for his daughter, where generations of Bushes celebrated and suffered, those rooms remain hidden. The Tiffany windows still glow with light. The perforated ceiling still waits to carry sound from the ballroom. The gun room still holds its trophies, but no one lives there anymore. The mansion at Grant's Farm is more than architecture. It is a monument to ambition, a testament to what one immigrant and his descendants built from nothing. But it is also a warning. Wealth does not buy happiness. Power does not guarantee peace. A name that opens every door can also become a prison. The curse, if there ever was one, was not supernatural. It was the curse of expectation, of pressure that crushed even the strongest men, of a legacy so heavy it broke those who tried to carry it. Adolphus built an empire. His son built a castle. His grandsons and great-grandsons tried to live up to a standard no human could maintain, and one by one, tragedy found them. August Sr., suffering in body and spirit, choosing to end his pain. Adolphus III, taken by sudden illness at 55. Christina, an innocent child, killed on a highway. Peter, haunted by an accident that took his best friend's life. August IV, surrounded by death and scandal. His girlfriend lost to drugs. His reputation shattered. The mansion has seen it all, absorbed it all, stood witness to both glory and grief. Yet the estate endures. The red brick walls, the limestone details, the French roofline, the German pride, all still stand strong against the Missouri sky. The deer still roam the park. The Clydesdales still pull their wagons. Children still laugh in the Bauernhof. The legacy is not only tragedy, it is also generosity. Gussy's decision to open Grant's Farm to the public has brought joy to millions. Families create memories there, memories untouched by the darkness that haunted the builders. The story of the Bush estate is the story of America itself. Immigrants arriving with nothing, building something extraordinary, reaching heights that seem impossible, then watching it all slip through their fingers. It is the story of fathers and sons, of dreams and disappointments, of castles built on hopes that crumbled under the weight of reality. Walk through Grant's Farm today, and you will feel it. The beauty and the sadness intertwined like the branches of the old oak trees. You will see the mansion in the distance, elegant and silent, keeping its secrets. You will hear the echoes of laughter from parties long past, the cries of children who played in gardens now quiet, the whispers of men who carried burdens too heavy to bear. The Bush family story is not over. Descendants still live, still carry the name, still wrestle with the legacy. But the golden age, the age of titans and emperors, the age when the name Bush meant invincibility, that age has passed. What remains is memory, stone, and the question that hangs over every great dynasty. Was it worth it? Was the price of glory too high? Perhaps there is no answer. Perhaps the mansion itself is the answer, standing tall and beautiful, scarred by time but unbroken, a testament to human ambition and human fragility. It reminds us that we are all builders and all victims of what we build, that success and suffering walk hand in hand, that even the mightiest fortress cannot protect us from the darkness we carry within ourselves. The deer still move through the park at dawn, silent as ghosts. The Clydesdales still stamp their hooves in their stalls. The mansion still rises above the trees, watching over land that has seen presidents and immigrants, triumph and tragedy, love and loss. And in the quiet moments, when the crowds have gone and the sun sets behind the western hills, You can almost hear it. The echo of Adolphus's laughter as he toasted his empire. The sound of August Sr.'s pen scratching out his final words. The music from Gussy's ballroom drifting through perforated ceilings. The voices of children who will never grow old. The weight of a name that promised everything and demanded even more. This is the story of the Busch estate, a castle built by beer barons, a dynasty touched by both blessing and curse, a family that conquered America but could not conquer the ghosts that haunted their own halls, and a mansion that stands today, beautiful and broken, a monument to dreams that rose too high and fell too hard, leaving behind only stone, memory, and the eternal question of what we sacrifice when we chase immortality.